So now it's my first year of high school. The summer before I started high school, I had lost a child, found out that my boyfriend was cheating on me, got dumped, was experiencing heartbreak, had an ectopic pregnancy, almost died, was told I would never have children again, even though I would go on to have 6 children with my husband that I married later. And my adoptive parents had just gotten a divorce, and we moved from the county to basically the city. So, and then my face breaks out completely, and I get no mental health treatment for any of that stuff. And also, that's when around the time I had gotten my bipolar diagnosis, right before my adoptive parents finally got a divorce. And my adoptive father was abusive towards me and my adoptive mom. So now it's my first year of high school, and I've moved into a completely new neighborhood in an environment that's completely different from what I'm used to. And I don't understand anything socially. I had grown up in private schools and pretty much alone. Like, I didn't know how to socialize. When I tell you, those were some of the most confusing times of my life because I'm just not like the average person from out there. And I didn't fit in anywhere. And high school was a nightmare for me. I tried to fit in. I got on the junior varsity volleyball team, but all the girls that were on the volleyball team were people that lived in my neighborhood, and they had all grown up with each other, and they didn't like me. I was hanging out with all the dudes from the very first day that I got there. I mean, I would like play football and heels and smoke cigarettes and smoke weed and rap, and we would have group fights because we used to bang people and stuff like that. All the neighborhoods would get group fights and stuff like that. I would be with the guys because they accepted me, they protected me. Those were my friends, but the girls did not like that. So they shunned me and they wouldn't speak to me. Do you know? And do you know what it's like to go to school with people who act like you don't exist? So that's how I ended up with my boyfriend, who I just remember being at lunch and always sitting at lunch by myself and no one ever talking to me. And he just came up to me one day and started talking to me. And before I knew it, I was going over his house and that was my boyfriend. So, of course, we start having sex. And after a while, I get pregnant by him. So now I'm pregnant again. And my adoptive mother is pissed. Like, at this point, she is over it. She's so pissed. And she gets him to give her this exorbitant amount of money for my abortion. She got him to give her like $800. And I remember it only cost like $4. But she forced me to get rid of that child because she said if I didn't, that she was going to put me out. And I was 15. So I remember going to have that done, and of course he dumped me. And you know, you gotta understand, when I get into relationships with people, even at that young age, all I had ever seen was marriage. So I honestly thought that we would be together forever. So I wasn't just experiencing these losses, I was also extremely heartbroken to the point of like wanting to take my own life. I always took heartbreak very hard, and it was just every day was horrible. I don't remember eating or sleeping for like years, just sobbing, sobbing and smoking weed and drinking, and just being outside and crying and staring at the sky and wondering why I felt like this wasn't my home, and just having a longing to be not on this earth, but to be like, I would just look at the moon and just know I wasn't from here. And I'm not saying I'm from the moon, but I know I am not from here. And especially on full moons, I would just cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and just be like, I want to go home. And I remember saying that from like very young age, like, I want to go home, bro. Especially after my parents told me that I was not their child and I was adopted. And they told me that on my birthday at such a late age. It was like, what, 11? Like, that's crazy. So just having an identity or like a connection, like, I'm just very different than anyone I've ever known. So after that happened, I ended up going to the psych ward again because, of course, I tried to take my own life because I was pregnant to the point where everybody in school could see that I was pregnant. So, like, I had to actually get carried out on a stretcher because again, my OD of choice was always taking too much pills, sleeping pills. And I did that, and I was just hallucinating in school, and I got carried out on a stretcher. It was just a nightmare. So that whole year, I managed to go on the junior varsity volleyball team, get ignored. I was also in the choir, and I was supposed to do a solo. They weren't gonna let me do the solo. They told me I could do it at the last minute, but I hadn't practiced because he had told me I couldn't do it, and I bombed in front of everybody. Then I was very visibly pregnant. The whole school knew, and then I had to go back to school after then being forced to get rid of the baby and not getting any therapy for it. So then I had to go back to school, and everybody knew I got rid of it. So then I had to, and then I tried to, and while I was at school, so I had to get carried out in front of the whole school. Like, high school was a nightmare. So after all that happens, I have to go right back to school after all that stuff happens, and I just start smoking weed heavy. So something happened where I had smoked before I left school, and I guess my adopted mom smelled it or whatever, and she called the school, or she called the cops or something, and the cops had met me at school and went through my locker and found my weed. So then I get kicked out of school, and I like had honors classes. Like I loved school. That was my only escape. That was my only escape from my mental health stuff, the abuse at home, not being accepted in my neighborhood, just being completely alone. My teachers liked me, and I was smart. So not being able to go to school like that was like the last straw. Like, I did not want to live anymore. Like, my parents didn't want me, my community didn't accept me. Like, the only friends that I had were some dudes that I just met that had grown up together that just happened to just mess with me, and they are my friends to this very day. Matter of fact, rest in peace to Big Mike, because he just passed away. Ron, Tay, Dreads, all of them, Demetrius, they took care of me. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, and shout out to my homeboys back in Baltimore. I love you. Thank you for being there for me. So school was really all I had, and I even started working at a very early age. It's all very jumbled, and it's hard for me to remember the timelines of stuff because my brain would just erase large amounts of time. So it's actually hard for me to remember how everything happened. But around that time, I think it was, I don't really remember whether it happened right before high school started, because there was a time period in there where I started working and I wasn't in school, but I hadn't gotten sent off to Job Corps yet. Because after I get caught up with the stuff at school, they kick me out and I have to go to an alternative school. When I go to that alternative school, I end up getting kicked out of there too for having weed, because my dumb ass going to tell my homeboy that was there, yo, I held up the dime bag and was like, we gonna smoke after school, and the bus driver saw it and snitched on me, and I got kicked out of there. So that's when I got put on probation. Now, around this time is when that's when it happened. So after that, that's when I met like this 30-year-old guy, started dating him. And I'm like 15 at this time. I'm 15. And so my adoptive mom has met, I can say his name because he's dead, this guy, we'll call him Barry. And he didn't like me. So they really didn't want me to stay there anymore. And her sister's daughter, which I'm not going to call her my cousin because I'm not blood related to these people, and she was horrible to me, which is why I bit her when I was a child, because she's bullied me my entire life. We'll call her Camilla. She was getting into it with her baby father. They were living together. They had an apartment. They broke up. So she had an apartment that she wanted to sublet to someone, which ended up being me, because when Barry and my adoptive mom got together, he wanted to move in and wanted me to move out. So that's what I did, because I was working at a time. I was working at a shoe store. Because back in Baltimore back then, you could work if you were 14 years old at 9 months. My first job was at IHOP. That was when we lived out in Randallstown. But when we moved to Woodlawn, I started working at a kids shoe store, like the shoe department or something. It was specifically kids, because I used to steal shoes for my little niece. Anyway, so I moved in with him, but I had been kicked out of school, and that's why I could work all the time. But I was very sad and very depressed. And I was just like sleeping with this man. And I'm telling you, once I'm sleeping with a man, I'm just all about him. Like I was so entranced by him. He was so much older than me. Everybody I was with was always older than me. Even the guy that I had gotten pregnant by, we'll call him Farkas. I was 15, he was 18 because he was a senior. He was a senior when I met him in high school. So he was 18. He was one of them older seniors. You know how you're going to be either 17 or 18 when you're a senior? He was older. So everybody that I had been with was older. And even the person that I had gotten pregnant with before, my boyfriend back when I was 14, when I had the ectopic pregnancy, he was 18. I've never been with anybody my old age, and it never dawned on me that these things might be untoward, a little weird, a little off, maybe not kosher, because that's just all I've ever known. So now I've got the apartment with him, but I don't know anything about bills. Like, I'm not old enough to be able to be responsible. I spent all my money on weed. Like, I could barely keep food and weed is where I spent all my money on. I didn't make that much. I worked part-time at a shoe store, and he didn't work. So we were there for maybe 2 months before we ended up getting kicked out. And I'm not talking about like kicked out by the apartment complex. I mean, my fake adopted cousin Camilla came over there with all her friends and her baby father that she didn't even get along with while she was pregnant, and there was like 12 of them, and they like put us out of the apartment. Like, I had to leave my cat outside. We were wandering around. I had nowhere to go type stuff. And I'm 15. So, of course, the 30-year-old guy goes right back with his parents. He just goes back and stays with his mom. And I end up having nowhere to stay. And I'm still on probation for being kicked out of school with the alternative school. You know, so now I'm being kicked out of my main school. Then I get kicked out of the alternative school. So now I'm on probation, not in school at all, and still coming up with dirty piss tests because I won't stop smoking weed. Not knowing that I'm using weed as like an antidepressant, low key. Like I've always done. So like there was not any me not smoking weed, even at that age. And thank God I had a case manager for probation that was just very loving and caring. Her and the woman that gave the urine screens, they would know because they ask you. They would ask you when the last time you smoked before they even gave you a drug screen. And I was also sentenced to drug classes and community service and stuff like that. So I did all that stuff. But it was like they knew my story and they saw that my parents were not taking care of me and they did not want me to get locked up, which was what was going to happen if I kept going up there and not being able to piss because I was dirty. So we came up with a plan to send me off to Job Corps, and that ended up saving me. And so that's where we'll pick up in chapter 9, is me ended up getting shipped off to Job Corps because I got kicked out of my cousin's apartment. I couldn't go back to my mom's house. I didn't have anywhere to go. And I was about to get violated because I was due for a piss test. They had already put it off twice. We had to come up with something. And when I tell you they fast-tracked me, nowadays it takes almost a month to get into Job Corps. But when I tell you within 48 hours, I was on a train on my way to West Virginia from Baltimore. Yeah. Thank you for spending time with me here in Fairy World. If you're interested in videos about mental health, single parenting, spirituality, or mental health, I have videos about all of those things. Check my playlist on my homepage. If you're interested in checking out my music, it's available on all music streaming platforms worldwide under my artist name, The Fury of Abyss. I love you, and I'll check you in the next episode. Peace.